Hi, everyone. Thank you so much to Manny Cruz for meeting with myself and Jillian tonight for a roundtable discussion. We are so happy to be working with him on his campaign and are more than grateful for his inclusion of youth voice in his run.
Yeah, take it from the top. We'll cut it.
We're good.
You can just cut it.
Got it.
Go ahead, Anyfern.
You got it, Anyfern.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much to Manny Cruz for meeting with myself and Jillian tonight for a roundtable discussion. We are so happy to be working with him on his campaign and are grateful for the inclusion of youth voice in his run. This conversation is pivotal for us for many reasons.
Yeah, so Anyfern and I are both Salem people. We're both from Salem, and youth voice is very important to both of us. Education is very important to both of us. And yeah, so we figured we're just going to introduce ourselves. So my name is Jillian Flynn, full name. I'm from Salem, Mass. I graduated Salem High, class of 2020, so a couple years ago during the pandemic. I currently go to Suffolk, an undergraduate legal studies major, studying, hoping to go to law school with political science minors and education minors. And as far as my involvement in Salem, I met Manny when I started working on the Student Advisory Council and was the student representative in my senior year, which was 2019 to 2020 academic year. And I'll let Anyfern introduce herself.
Yes. Hi, everyone. My name is Anyfern Gonzalez. I am also from Salem, Mass, and I'm a product of the Salem Public Schools District. I went to Nathaniel Bowditch through K through 8, and I attended Salem High School, where I graduated in 2019. And in terms of my involvement and how I met Manny, I was actually working on the planning of the implementation of the Student Advisory Council in order to get Jillian as a representative the following year. And I've always been involved in the local politics and have always kind of aspired to be a leader in that realm. I currently attend Bentley University. I'm a junior and I'm majoring in diversity, equity, and inclusion with an LSM in global perspectives. And so now I'm more than happy to bring on Manny Cruz, the candidate for state representative.
Anyfern, Jillian, so good to be with you this evening. And thank you both for the many contributions that you've made, not just to my campaign, but my career in public service. Getting to know the both of you through my role on the school committee, that is exactly why I decided to run. It was because of the kids in our public schools and the awesome potential that I know that each and every single one of you have, and the opportunity that we were missing to really have youth at our side, helping us make decisions for a district that had a direct impact on their lives. So just want to first express my gratitude to both of you, and then maybe I'll do my own introduction. So for those of you listening, my name is Manny Cruz. By way of background, I'm from Salem, Massachusetts. I'm a proud Afro-Latino. My family's from the Dominican Republic and Puerto Rico. I went to the public schools here in Salem. I went to Horace Mann, Collins Middle School, and I graduated in 2010. And growing up as a young person in Salem, I was considered an opportunity youth. I was raised by a single mom, and me and my two brothers, we went through our public school system dealing with trauma. We grew up in poverty, and my mom and us, we survived domestic violence. And I think I carried with me an experience as a young man in the public schools of holding a lot of pain that expressed itself in, I think, some outbursts in the classroom. I had a lot of trouble focusing, and it wasn't until I really met my mentors at the Boys and Girls Club and at Leap for Education that I was able to activate myself as a leader in my own life, but also in my community. So when I talk about youth voice and its importance in my campaign, it really ties back to my story. Once my mentors at Leap for Education and the Boys and Girls Club activated me in leadership roles within those organizations as a young person, then I was really ready to go out to the larger community and to try to make an impact. So I had the pleasure of serving on the Keystone Leadership Club at the Boys and Girls Club. And then at Leap for Education, I was doing direct mentoring of middle school students. And I saw myself reflected in the students that I was working with. And that's when I realized that I wanted to be an advocate and someone who created policy change. So my mentor, Linda Saris, she spotted that I had this interest in political science. We were watching the 2008 election together, and I was just inspired by the run of then Senator Barack Obama, who would later go on to become president. But Linda did something special. She walked me through the entire presidential nominating process from start to finish. And then she used it as a hook to really get me interested in my own education. At the time, I had a 2.0 GPA, but Linda took it upon herself to say, Manny, did you know that when you go to college, you get a 4.0 GPA, you get a fresh start. You can do all the things that you want to do when you get there, and you can study political science, and then you can come back to your community in public service. And that's exactly what I did. So I went to Salem State for 2 years, and I studied political science, and I had a 3.7 GPA. And then I transferred to Northeastern, where I completed my studies. I went on several co-ops, all focused on nonprofits and government agencies, with the desire to learn as much as I could about scaling up my impact. And professionally, after graduating from Northeastern with honors, I went to go work at the State House for both State Representative Juana Matias of Lawrence and State Representative Paul Tucker. And it was during that time I had the privilege of running to be the first Afro-Latino to win a school committee seat in Salem. I was the youngest elected official at the time, and my why was our children. As a mentor, as a coach, and as someone who went through the public schools, I knew the gaps that existed for our kids, but I also knew the awesome opportunity that we had to transform their education. And through my time as a school committee member and working in the State House, I really tried to hit the ground running, familiarizing myself with local policies, what was happening at the state level. But then additionally, I knew that I had this important responsibility to organize my own community. And so I really focused on educational equity as the key policy lever that I wanted to push for as a school committee member. I started working with our young people to advocate for their needs and to really help build their capacity, because that was the thing that was the difference in my story, was that I had someone that I could go to when I needed advice on how to navigate some of the issues and opportunities that I was experiencing. And I know the awesome potential that we have as a Commonwealth when we bring young people into our process. And so now I'm running for state representative, and I am so fortunate to have the support of people like Jillian and Anyfern. And I'm running for state representative because I want to fight for the things that I think matter to all of us: a clean energy future and climate resiliency, addressing the affordable housing crisis, transforming our educational system so that it better serves all of our students. And then additionally, I want to get to work on the issues of economic mobility and prosperity. And together, through our conversation today, I hope I can share a little bit more about my candidacy, who I am, and why I think together we can send me to Beacon Hill, and I can be the best state representative for Salem.
Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. I am truly so inspired by all of the things that you have done to uplift the youth, as a product of the system myself, and being able to work with you and continuously knowing that I can go much further than I think I'm capable of. So I think, just to start off, for a lot of the people that may be listening to this right now and are not aware of what a state representative is, what is a state representative and what would your work consist of?
This is an excellent question, Anyfern, and I'm happy to provide a little bit more information. And so, similar to the federal branches of government, where we have the three branches, the Congress, the executive branch, and the presidency, and the Supreme Court, Massachusetts is actually a model that's very similar. So we have what's called the state legislature, we have the governor, who's the chief executive officer of the state, and then we have the courts, and the Supreme Judicial Court, which is the highest level of the appellate courts. And the state legislature is made up of two bodies. The Massachusetts House of Representatives, and then there is the Massachusetts State Senate, and they are the legislative body that makes the state laws, and they set the budget here in our Commonwealth in conjunction with the role that the governor plays. And so, what is a state representative? In the Commonwealth, we have 160 state representatives. Each of them represents approximately 40,000 people that make up their districts. And many of the state representatives are categorized by the counties, and then they get a little bit more granular with the specific district. So I'm running to be the state representative of the 7th Essex District of Salem. And Salem's population kind of neatly fits into that 40,000 mark. And it's one of a host of communities in the Commonwealth in which the state representative only represents one municipality. Many of the other state representatives represent multiple towns or maybe a few pieces of some of the larger gateway cities. And, you know, that's essentially what makes up the role of the state rep. And then what they do day to day. So number one, the state representative over the course of what's known as a legislative session, which lasts approximately 2 years, they focus on setting the laws for the state in those periods. So they file bills annually in the first year of the session. About 7,000 bills get filed in our legislature, and representatives propose their own laws. They co-sponsor others. And the goal is fundamentally to try to pass bills that not only have an impact on your local community, but also that set the stage for the priorities of the Commonwealth in areas like climate, housing, economic mobility and prosperity, healthcare, education. And then additionally, the legislature has the role of drafting up budgets. So on the House side of things, the legislature is actually beginning the process through the Ways and Means. So the governor is the first person to file his budget, and then the House goes next in April, and then the Senate goes in May, and then the two bodies really negotiate. So in the budget process, as the state representative, I would probably be pushing for some high priority statewide items that I would love to see further investment in. Like, as an example, one of my priorities is educator diversity. I would probably be the chief sponsor of an amendment to create first-time state investment in the diversification of our educator pipeline. And then the state representatives in the budget also get an opportunity to file what are called budgetary amendments. And so I could file an amendment that's a local line item. So I could work with a local nonprofit or a city project, and I could get some local earmarked funding so that I could have a direct impact in our state, in our city, with respect to some funding from the state. So that's a little bit about the role, where the charge comes from, and the things that I would be kind of doing day to day from a policy perspective. And then the last piece that I would add is that the state representative is also part of their role is to provide service to the constituency. So that's engagement, that's meeting people where they are and learning about what their priorities are. So on a day-to-day basis, I'd be attending events, I'd be touring our schools and learning about the issues that impact Salem so that I can take that knowledge and be a better advocate on Beacon Hill. And then additionally, I also could engage in what's known as constituent services, which is directly liaising with my constituents, who would be the residents of Salem, and state agencies to try to get them the assistance that they may need.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And just to maybe add to that, I know you spoke a little bit about what you want to focus on during your time at Beacon Hill, but is there anything in particular that you're looking forward to focus on? I know you've spoken about, you know, equity in education, and I know in some of your supporting policies for like housing and healthcare and all of these things, and most importantly, just like youth and civic engagement. So can you just speak a little bit more about what you'd be most excited for and what you'll be working on during your time at Beacon Hill?
That's a great question, Anyfern. And I would say that when it comes to my priorities, I'm a millennial, and I'm someone that has a fundamental understanding that my future is not guaranteed due to the climate crisis. So I know that there's a lot of folks in our respective generations that really care about the future of the planet. I'm a brand new dad. I have a 10-month-old little baby girl, and I want her to enjoy Salem as I remember it. But we're at dire risk of not mitigating the impacts of climate change. And so I really want to be an advocate for climate justice communities like Salem. And one of the bills that I want to focus on is called the Green Futures Act. So a lot of folks are familiar with the National Green New Deal, which would be some investments that would create a new green energy future, new green energy jobs, and really shift our economy. Well, we can do that right here in Massachusetts by supporting bills like the Green Futures Act. Salem is going to be a leader in offshore wind. We're currently transitioning an old energy plant into a wind farm here in Salem. And where the opportunity lies is with the Green Futures Act. What it would do is it would fund some of the elements around the infrastructure necessary for the entire state to start transitioning a little bit quicker towards clean energy, but it would also focus on the workforce and getting folks prepared for those jobs of the future, which in my opinion, they have to be those green energy jobs, because as we're seeing with some of the international crises that we're experiencing around energy, we can no longer rely on fossil fuels to be the source of our energy. And so I do think that, that is one bill I would love to prioritize. I'm an educational equity advocate in my role at Latinos for Education. And we're pushing for a few different priority areas. And I would take on these same priorities if I was the state representative. So I would love to push for Educator Diversity Act. It's a bill that we're currently working with the chair of the Education Committee, Alice Paishon. She's a dear friend. And what the bill would do is accelerate the diversification of the teacher pipeline by creating new pathways for people to become teachers. It would more transparently share some of the data around where we currently stand with educator diversity. Right now in the Commonwealth, only 12% of our educators identify as teachers of color, but over 40% of our students identify as students of color. And if you think about your own educational experience, I often think about mine. I've actually counted. I had 50 teachers between my K through 16 experience. Only 3 of those teachers were Latina. And they identified with my culture, my experience, and the difference that they made in my life was pretty apparent. And I think every kid should have that opportunity. And so we need to set goals as a state as to what the future of the education workforce looks like. And that bill would accomplish that, in addition to creating some, I would say, like new working conditions in our public schools, and providing new funding so that districts can do this work in earnest. But fundamentally, that bill is about the experience that our students are having. All kids benefit from having a diverse educator in the classroom. Additionally, I think one of the key levers for economic opportunity is the attainment of a college degree or some type of career vocational technical education training. So one of the things that I would love to focus on is expanding what we call the early college program, which is a dual enrollment program that is protected for underrepresented students, first generation of college, Black, Latinx students. And there's some bills in the legislature that would transform our high schools into what we call early college high schools. And I would love to support those bills and to be a champion of the acceleration of the expansion of early college, as what we know about it from the data is that it's having a tremendous impact on the completion rate of our students when it comes to attaining a college degree, their persistence, and then their skills and their confidence, because you start that program when you're in high school, you're getting college credits, and by the time you enter college, you might have anywhere between 30 to 60 college credits, which is a huge saving. And then hopefully you'll persist and get your degree and then be able to go into a career path that could lead to economic mobility. And then the last priority, I would say, is definitely around civic engagement and our young people. I think that there's a lot of opportunities to expand access to the ballot box for our youth. So there's currently a bill right now called the Votes Act, which would expand some of the voting opportunities that exist, like same-day registration, early voting, mail-in voting. These are all things that we learned during the pandemic, create greater equity in our voting system. Because when you think about just youth as an example, sometimes they haven't taken the steps to get registered. They're waiting on that conversation with a friend, or maybe even an elected official that inspires them to get involved. And sometimes they miss the window to either cast their ballot or to get registered. So I think same-day voter registration is a great equalizer for our young people, for people of color, and those that may not necessarily be in the know about their civic responsibilities. And it would be a great opportunity to have more people engaged in the process. But there's one thing I would love to add to a bill like that. And this is where I think the difference in my candidacy comes in, is that I know policy. So Jillian, you are our student representative on the school committee. And one of the things that, I didn't, that I would have loved to see changed, but it requires a change in the state law, would have been for you to be a voting member of the school committee. Rather than being kind of performative and a non-voting member, you contributed to the dialogue. But I can think about instances where it really matters for our students to be able to be equal partners with our adults, and you having a vote on the school committee would have been critically important. So I would have filed an amendment to the Votes Act to include empowering the school student representative to be able to vote at the school committee, because I do think our young people, they are more activated in our communities than they have ever been. They're ready, they're prepared, and with the support that we should be providing them, they'll be well equipped to be able to make decisions in our districts. So those are a few of the priorities that I would have, is thinking through the ways in which I could really expand opportunity for residents in the Commonwealth and in Salem.
Yes, thank you so much for sharing that, and especially on the education piece. I mean, as a product of the Salem School District as well, when I think about the teachers that I've had who I couldn't relate to, or that I did, were very few. And when we think about the population of the students in Salem and how many of those are of color and how the schools aren't representative of that, I know that kind of creates some gaps for some of these students in education. And then kind of going off of the priorities that you mentioned, we know that, a lot of this wouldn't or won't be possible without the support of other local leaders. So how are you looking forward to building and maintaining some of those relationships that you already have with local political leaders?
So an effective state representative, Anyfern, should be a coalition builder. Fundamentally, you can't do this work alone. So I view leadership through the lens of what we would call community leaders, like yourselves, right? You're not elected, but it doesn't mean that you're not a leader within our city. And then there's the elected folks, so our city councilors, our school committee members, our mayor. You really need a positive working relationship with them, because they're seeing the day-to-day issues in the city. So on my end, how I would approach this, number one, I'm working really hard to build those relationships now. I am looking to build support amongst our local leaders, and it's been reciprocated in their support for me. And I think the reason why our locally elected leaders are supporting me is because they've seen what I've done on the school committee. I'm a positive, solution-oriented policymaker. I really try to bring people into my process, and I try to collaborate as much as possible. And I think that the knowledge that I bring about the state legislative policy process, budget, you name it, those are the things that people look to for my guidance. And I'm always willing to share my platform and my power with them. So I do think that local leaders, at least the elected ones, view me as someone that they can work with if I was on Beacon Hill. And I try to set up as many opportunities to meet directly with them, for them to show me the issues. If they're a ward councilor within their neighborhood, I'd want to be touring the schools still, so that I can get a sense of, what are the issues the school committee faces. And I should probably mention that if I am elected, I am planning on finishing my term, because I think it's critically important that we have Latino representation on the school committee. And I wouldn't want to leave that vacuum there. But I guess what I'll mention is that I firmly believe that I would be doing a disservice to our community if I wasn't preparing another Latino leader to take on the mantle of being a leader on the school committee. So when I talk about those community leaders, I want to meet people where they are, right? Through conversations like this one, through capacity building, referring people to fellowships and opportunities to grow their leadership and to scale, and to join the community processes for decision making, so that I can directly hear from folks about what some of their pain points are and what role I can play to help facilitate solutions.
Thank you. I really appreciate you talking about that. I know when I worked with you on the school committee, like, it was really nice having someone there as like a support system and someone to ask questions to, because I didn't really know much about like how the system worked. I knew from like classes and stuff, like generally how things went, but I think putting it in place and, being someone who kind of talked in front of the whole city, it was definitely like scary at first, but like got a little easier over time, still working on it. But yeah, I really appreciate that. I think you're someone that definitely seems like they thrive off of like support, like you're a very supportive person, and I appreciate that. So moving on to a little bit of a different topic, specifically, like, how has it been managing recently having a child and all the work that you've been doing with your different positions, and then just like your campaign as well?
And thank you, Jillian. And I'm glad you mentioned the support piece, because it's one of the most important roles that we play as leaders. It's not about us, it's about the community, and how are we building up our communities and others to serve. And so, that's me passing on what's been given to me by our community here in Salem and other leaders. And I think that that's something that I'm going to continue to do, regardless of what role I'll play in the community. And then when it comes to balancing some of the different issues and challenges with my schedule, I am a new dad, and that has had It's been a blessing for me to be a parent, and it's hard, right? Because you're running a campaign. I still work full time. I'm doing my role in the school committee. That's a duty I signed up for, and it's non-negotiable. But I guess the advice that I would provide to folks is to really think about the prioritization of your schedule. So I'm lucky that I have support both in my office role, but then through my kitchen cabinet. I think my volunteers are so protective of me as a human being because they're my friends. They're people I've mentored. They're the two of you. And you all see my schedule and my calendar, and you are all the first ones to say, Manny, I don't think you need to take another meeting or event. You need to give yourself some space, spend some time with that baby and your wife. And that is why I just feel like I'm one of the most lucky people running for public office. Is yeah, there's some tough days where like I feel like I haven't held my daughter enough, or like gone to the gym, those little things. But because I have people around me who care about my well-being, I'm able to do the prioritization, but still feel good at the end of the day because I know I have like a village of people behind me. So the balance is hard. I'll definitely be transparent about that. But my dedication to service is it's there. So I'm going to do what I can, and I'm going to put my best foot forward, and the results I believe will speak for themselves.
I really appreciate that. I think being honest about that is really nice because I think it gives other people the impression too that they can do it, have that balance, especially like I know like people talk about how it's really difficult to have kids with everything going on. But yeah, I appreciate that. So I know we talked a little bit about like climate change and one of the bills that you want to kind of like move forward with, but is there anything else specifically that you're working on or would like to see like upcoming in the future?
Yeah, so the housing crisis it's here, it's evident. We're seeing it in Salem and across the Commonwealth that we have the rising prices when it comes to the rents in our community. And I hear about housing all the time. When I was the state representative's legislative aide, Rep. Tucker, when I was working in his office, it was the #1 issue we got calls about was people being displaced from their homes, needing state assistance, not being able to afford where they were living, and coming to us as kind of a last option, seeking supports. So what that speaks to is a real systemic issue in which, #1, the history is the state, the federal government, they used to play a role in the production of housing and then also incentivizing home ownership as a way to create intergenerational wealth for families. And additionally, we have the existence of what's known as redlining, which is a systemic policy that was put into place to exclude communities of color, Black, Latino, Indigenous people from being able to access the same level of resources. And the impact of redlining, segregation, all of that certainly plays a role in where we currently stand with the housing crisis. So a few of the things that I would love to work on Beacon Hill and be a champion of are #1, I'd love to create new pathways for affordable home ownership for our residents. So we currently in the Commonwealth have a couple of bills that are designed to beyond like the lending products that are offered through the state that are really designed at the production of building housing. And I'd love to be a little bit nuanced. I learned about this great program when I was an aide in Lawrence called Bread and Roses Housing, in which this nonprofit organization was using a combination of state and federal funds to buy old properties and then redevelop them. And what they would do is they would then sell those homes to low income residents. You had to be within a certain income threshold to buy the house. And on the market, the house was probably worth close to $500,000. But because of Bread and Roses, they were only selling it for like $120,000 for a 3-family. And that's huge. And what the program allowed those families to do was to actually pass that property onto their children. So I'd love to see some type of program established that expands and scales up this type of affordable home ownership program so that we can, as a state, work with communities to purchase property and then sell them below market to those that are living in low income economic brackets, and then be able to pass that generational wealth onto their kids. Because I think that is, or their family. I think that that's one way that we can build wealth. And a mortgage in some instances is actually less money per month than rent. And so that's one thing. I'd also love to see more programs designed to increase the amount of down payment assistance that local communities in the state are able to assist with. I think one of the key issues that prevent people from going and being able to buy a home is they're really scared about, can I afford a down payment? So I'd love to see the expansion of down payment assistance programs and to kind of scale up the amount of money that the Commonwealth is willing to invest in folks with respect to this area. And then there's two more pieces around the affordable housing crisis that I think are really important. So I think number one, I'd love to see a bill that was filed by a colleague of mine, and it establishes what's called a real estate transfer tax. And this is aimed at some of the new developments that we see coming in. And I'd love to incentivize developers to move towards, because they're the ones with the means, if they're going to build housing, we have to try to incentivize them to get to 20% affordability in some of the units that are coming our way. And if they can't do that, I think they need to be engaged in some type of community benefit agreement. And that to me is an additional tax that would get paid to the community and to the state so that we can build more affordable housing. Because the production of housing is something that's where the equalization is going to happen. If we have the North Shore CDC acquiring more housing versus private developers, we're going to see a decrease in some of the prices. And if the Salem Housing Authority, which hasn't built anything new in ages, was to have some type of pool of funding that they could use to acquire property to then build, more affordable units, I think that would go a long way towards addressing some of the issues with the housing crisis. And then the last piece is about living with dignity. There's a need to address the deferred maintenance in some of our housing authorities. There's a lot of folks that are low income, families, seniors, people with disabilities that are living in situations that are really just undignified. They need access to new resources to be able to do the maintenance that I think has been deferred. So I'd love to think about opportunities either through a bond bill or a budget to create new investments in some of the staffing in maintenance for the housing authorities to ensure that people can live in a dignified manner.
Yes, thank you so much. Those were all really great points. I really appreciate that because I have been so fortunate to grow up in the Point neighborhood, and it's something that concerns me a lot with kind of the majority that does live there, right? I think about those that have been like primarily affected by this crisis and, the rent prices being so high and kind of those community members being driven out of the neighborhood and surrounding ones. So my question to you would just be, how are you looking to involve community members in conversations regarding any changes that would come about from housing?
And this is a great follow-up question, Anyfern. So I think about this as the role of the state representative isn't just to pass these policies, to advocate for budgets, it's also to educate our constituencies. So one of the things that I would love to do as the state representative is to host forums in which I can provide updates to our residents about what's happening on Beacon Hill, what the latest status of particular bills that are priorities for our residents are. So I'd love to do a housing forum as the state representative in which I could bring in some of the coalitions that are working on addressing the affordable housing crisis. We could have a panel of some of the experts that can answer questions. And then additionally, I think I could also make it service-based. I would love to be of support of Northeast Legal Aid. You mentioned the displacement of people and evictions that have occurred, throughout the pandemic and prior to. One of the things that people in those situations often don't get access to is legal advice and help. So I think I'd love to do a housing forum that also gets paired up with a housing clinic so that people that might be in a legal situation could have the advice of counsel on how to navigate, either a notice to quit, or let's say, there's some type of other issue, right? They want to apply for a housing resource like RAFT, which is the program that's about housing families in transition. And so I do think that it would be great if I could bring that type of resource to the community so that I could really share out what's happening at a policy level, but then also people can get access to some of the invaluable resources that exist in our Commonwealth. And I want folks to know I'm going to be the type of person that fights in the budget to bring these types of local resources to Salem.
I really appreciate that too. I think that it's really sometimes like the legal process is super confusing, especially when it comes to things like that. And so I think having those resources for people is like super important. And yeah, so kind of moving on a little bit, talk a little bit about education. I know that's something that's really important to Anyfern and I, and something that we're looking to get more involved in. So I know that you were recently elected as the vice president of the school committee. So how will you use that role in partnership with your role as state representative to further the needs of people in Salem?
And Jillian, I know how important education is to both of you and how passionate you are about this issue. And this is part of the reason why I've told folks from the get-go that I'm going to finish out my term on the school committee if I'm elected as state representative. And the reason why I want to do that is because I know how much need we have in our public schools for the type of leadership that I bring to the table. And you know, when it comes to this role, I think because it's the two roles in tandem, you know, at the local level, I want to continue to be the type of school committee member that is highly involved in some of the busiest subcommittees, policy, our personnel negotiations. And I spend a lot of time in our public schools. So whether it's going in and reading to kids, observing classrooms, taking tours, and you know, working directly with our students, all those things I still want to maintain. But with my state representative role, I think what I would do is I would really look to advocate for where I see the gaps in terms of the state government. And so where are the gaps? So number one, the state funding formula was recently revamped. However, when we look at the Chapter 70 allocations that Salem received, we're not getting a lot of money from the new formula, despite the fact that we're a gateway city and we have a lot of need. And so one of the things that I would want to do is I would want to try to see if there's a way for me to amend the Chapter 70 formula to not punish gateway cities that experience economic growth, because that was the thing that played a role in Salem, I think, not receiving a greater portion of the Chapter 70 dollars, because our needs in terms of multilingual learners, students with disabilities, students that were lower income, they didn't go down. They stayed the same. What we saw is that we're experiencing declining enrollment while our city is also experiencing economic growth. And the two factors, less kids going to our public schools because they have more options and a host of other reasons, means that we're getting less funding from the state, but it doesn't mean that the kids that remain don't have needs. So I would want to see if there's an opportunity to amend the formula to take that into account and to hold a gateway city like Salem harmless for any economic growth that they might experience. Secondly, I think our kids need greater access to CTE programming because not every student is going to go to college. And so there's two things I would love to do. Number one, I'd love to reassess the admission standards for schools like the vocational tech schools, as when we look at the demographics, they don't necessarily reflect the diversity of the Commonwealth. And I think that it's really important for us to reassess the way that we do admissions, because I'm curious about, well, where's the alignment with the number of students that we have in our public schools that want to go on to career technical education, but aren't able to do it because they don't have the program in their public school. And if we can build it in the public school, great, but we can't replicate what's at Essex Tech. So, and then there's like the disconnect of the kids that go to Essex Tech, and they're within their rights to make a different choice. But I think about the need for, you know, those same kids, they're graduating and then they're not choosing career technical education. They might be going on to a four-year university. And then there was a missed opportunity for that kid that only gets to do high school once and wanted to go into career technical education. So I do think from an equity perspective and an economic one, we really need to reassess the admission standards for career technical education. Which then brings me to my next point, which is in our public schools, we need greater investment in comprehensive high schools to ensure that when we redesign them, we also consider CTE as a pathway for our kids. Because when we think about the student debt crisis and the interests that our students have, they need all the full options at their disposal. So I'd love to see if I can start a conversation about Chapter 74 and some new investments in CTE for our public schools, so that all kids, regardless of whether they're at a Voc Tech or their general public high school, they're able to engage in a CTE program that speaks to their interests and could lead to a career that would be fulfilling. So those are some of the priorities that I would have when it comes to educational equity. I think the other piece that I would raise up is that I think it's really super important for our kids to have access to civic education. So the Commonwealth already passed legislation to require some type of civic engagement related project or curriculum at a certain grade level. I'd like to expand on that. I do think that we need to reassess the frameworks in which we educate our children in the wake of George Floyd's murder, what we're seeing with climate change, and all of the other issues that seem to divide our country. It's really important for all of our students to graduate with the competency of what it means to be a good citizen, not just a good student. So I do think, expanding on the civic engagement legislation that was passed in 2018 is going to be necessary. And I think we do that by going right at the frameworks and providing some funding for our teachers to do some really creative projects in tandem with our students to help elevate their competencies when it comes to civic education. Because I often think about who's coming up behind us to be our next leaders in our community. And I think every young person should be equipped to know, how does my local government work? How does my state government work? And what can I do to advocate for change in my community?
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I think for me, my history classes in high school, my relationships with those teachers is really what forced me into the path that I'm in now. And so it's super important. And kind of talking a little bit about teachers and faculty in Salem, how are you planning on maintaining those relationships as a state representative? I know you work with them a lot now as the vice president of the school committee, but how is that going to develop or change in your position?
Yeah, so this is a great question. So at the local level, I'll certainly maintain the relationship with our local union, but then I'll have the opportunity to work with the state AFT. And Beth Contos is the president of AFT, and then Mary Najimi is the president of MTA. And I'm pleased to share I have really strong relationships with both of them through my capacity at Latinos for Education and the work that I do in our community. So what I would do differently as the state representative, I would use my role as an opportunity to elevate our educators. I would want to involve them in the legislative process so that they can advocate for the type of state policies that we know would make a difference in the lives of our kids. I think about the teacher of the year, Martha Garcia. She's here in Salem. She has such a valuable perspective on what's missing when it comes to bilingual education. So I'd want to bring her up to Beacon Hill, not just to honor her for the work that she does, but so that decision makers can hear directly from her the ways in which we're not serving our multilingual learners. So my platform is one that I want to share with members of our communities, and teachers are certainly at the forefront of that, as are our administrators. So I want to have a strong local coalition of teachers that I can bring up to Beacon Hill with me when there is an education-based issue. But then additionally, I think about the opportunities for me to recognize them as well. I think that Salem has a rich tradition of honoring people for the service that they bring to the table. And I want to be the type of person that is at our school committee meetings, as in my role as the state rep, with a citation in hand to honor all the teachers that might be retiring, that have received some type of award. So I want to be the kind of person that celebrates our educators, because we can't do it enough.
Yeah, just before we close out, I really want to thank you so much for taking time to talk to Jillian and I today. It's really an honor for us to be able to have these conversations with you, because you have been such an imperative impact in our growth, just as youth leaders in the city of Salem. I mean, you've seen us, come from high school into like our college lives now and continuing to make that change within ourselves. And we're so excited to continue to support you in your run for state representative and all the impact that you have left to make and represent Salem on Beacon Hill.
Well, thank you so much, Jillian and Anyfern, for your time today. It was such a pleasure to catch up with the both of you. And I really appreciated this conversation. And I hope that, as we continue the campaign, we can find more opportunities so that I can continue to hear from young people in our district who historically haven't been engaged in these types of races. But today is a new day in Salem, and I'm going to be doing my part. So I look forward to planning youth forums with you, youth town halls, so that I can hear directly from our young people in Salem what their priorities are. And then maybe we can also think about the ways in which we can build their capacity, because I have high expectations for the two of you with respect to the future of Salem. And let's continue to do the work of building the bench.
Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you, Jillian. Thank you, Anyfern.